Yeah, thanks, Jill. Sorry, I wasn't very good at giving you the normal cue there. Yeah, so this is, one of the, he's sort of, as you do this game known as contemplation or meditation, and you're trying to lead a more uh, contemplative life. I think that's why most of you are here, unbeknownst to yourself, maybe sometimes. It's like a game of takeaway. And I have a poem about why you lose things in life. And but contemplation or meditation is like a game of takeaway. And Mies van der Rohe, who was one of the great architects in the modernist period, he came up with this statement: less is more. And in contemplation, it's certainly that. But notice in here why you sit down. I mean, why do you meditate uh, uh, daily? Why do you show up? And the center of our meeting here today is a time of silent meditation and contemplation. Why do you do that? And how often, how many times do you spend a sitting trying to solve the current problem? Yeah, Merton's got something there, and we'll lean into that at the end. But less is more. Less is more, and that's one of the things you can just drop out of what you're doing when the bell rings and you're going to the silent. If you catch yourself solving a problem or trying to, lay that aside. Okay, so we'll get back to this, but there's probably just two items from yesterday that relate to that we can spring off of. One was the image of a train station. I was using the image of a train station at one time to as a metaphor for what it's like to sit in contemplation. It's like one thought after another coming through the station. Mary Wright was there yesterday, and she talked about being in Union Station in Washington, D.C. And she mentioned Grand Central Station. Both of those are a couple good images for what it's like when you sit down in the silence, and then what your head turns into. It's a bit like Grand Central Station, or I like Union Station, because one train of thought after another are coming. And the point is, and this is part of the practice, when you find yourself, the trains are not the problem. They're all identified, anger, jealousy, envy. There are all these trains of thoughts that we have, pissed off, even joy. It doesn't matter what the destination is. You've ridden them all. We were talking about creating new neural pathways. It's the old ones we're stuck into. We ride those old trains of thought. Every time you're back on that same train of thought, that neural groove gets a little deeper. And so this act of, again, these 9 words are sort of cornerstone for me, laying thoughts aside. We are drawn to the center. So this is the only thing on the to-do list when you catch yourself that, and you will, it's not even when, it's, it's not if, it's when you catch yourself riding some train of thought, some familiar train of thought, like, oh, I don't like that. And then you're in all resistance, you're on the resistance express. Okay. When you realize it, you have the ability now to just hop off. Yeah. And that's essentially the basic thing for in contemplation, which is awareness with no object, which it's the far reaches of meditation. Again, I'm trying to remind you, there's a spectrum of meditation, from mindfulness to meditation with an object. You're concentrating on your breath, or you got a mantra. It's all good, and it all could be appropriate for the given moment. But if you want to actually explore the absolute loftiest end of meditation, where you get the most bang for the buck, it's being aware with no point. Your awareness with no object. And the reason all the mystics end up there in all the traditions is because they're trying to be aware of this transcendent thing that we call a God or Allah or the Tao. The name changes, but we're trying to be aware of that thing that is not a thing, not an object, you see. We're drawn to that. And so we lay aside any thought that comes up because that can't be it. And you could spend a whole 20 minutes just on one train of thought. Then at the end of it, okay, that neural groove's gotten deeper, but, you're a little bit less free. So even in meditation, Bob Thurman once said, the great Tibetan teacher, he said, if you take a neo-Nazi skinhead and you put him in a 5-day Zen sesshin, chances are he's going to come out a stronger neo-Nazi skinhead. So it has a lot to do with laying your repetitive kind of thoughts aside. Less is more. Less is more. The famous Zen story about that is this academic looks up this Zen master. He shows up at this address of this little known Zen master. And he thought if he could interview him, he could get a little something to publish something about this interview. So he shows up at this place, doesn't even have a door. And there's nothing in the room but this sort of little guy who's whisking some green tea and not even any furniture or anything. And he sort of knocks on the door and sort of says he's there to see the Zen master. And the guy says, hey, I don't know, somebody's pulling your leg. I don't know who you're talking about. And but he said, come on, have a cup of tea here. Have a cup of tea. And then you got to go all the way back to Tokyo. At least you can get a cup of tea out of it. So he gives the guy the teacup and starts pouring away. Okay, and he pours and pours and pours, and then it fills up and starts going out. Keep going all over the tatami mat, and finally the professor says, "Hey, hold it! It's overflowing. It's full up." And the Zen master takes the cup and dumps it all out. And he says, like this cup, you too are full of it. It translated Japanese. He said, until you empty your cup, you can learn nothing of Zen. So again, less is more. This is also an image of what we're doing for 20 minutes. Just this. Thought comes up and starts filling up the cup. I heard I was talking to Deb Sells there, and we were talking about this and that, and I was talking about when I went to mass in Haiti one time, the little priest channeled his inner kind of Malcolm X slash Southern preacher, and he talked for almost an hour in Creole. So I'm not, he's talking for an hour in Creole, and at the end of it, the woman next to me was my translator. I said, what was all that about, that hour? And she said, jealousy. We can be full of it. It could be just one simple thought. They're not taking this from me. But he had to, it obviously was pretty important. But I said, just jealousy? He said, yeah, jealousy, So see, this is what you're doing when you're sitting. Less is more. Less of those old repetitive thoughts. There's nothing wrong with them. The trains are going to keep coming. You just start to get the sense of, oh yeah, I know where that leads. Oh yeah, I know where that leads. You start becoming, you're standing on the platform and you don't get on those trains. When you do get on the trains, when you realize it, that's the only thing I've gained in 50 years. I get on the trains less, but when I get on the trains, I know it sooner and I just get off. However you get off, you can breathe a sacred word like in centering prayer, you can just breathe out, that works. You can smile a little bit at how you've been tricked again. That's good for the humility. Less is more, you see, less is more. Now, these things, jealousy, anger, these powerful emotions. The second thing we picked up on, we talked about the ability to hop off the train. You learn that, and when you hop off the train and you're on the platform, something new can happen. It is a little bit disorienting because you're used to those trains of thought, you see. So when you hop off for a nanosecond or a second or 2 minutes, you're not on any train, and then you hop on another train. Okay, then you catch it and you hop off, and then you're again just here, just this, just now, and something's happening in that moment. Say that moment of emptiness, which was what the emptiness means in the Buddhist sense. You know, you're open. You know, if you have an empty cup, you could put something new in it. When it's totally full up, when you're totally full of it, full of your own thoughts that you've thought for 70 years, nothing new can get in. You see, so. And this is very hard to teach, especially in the West, especially in the consumer culture, because we don't think of spirituality as subtractive. It's a practice of subtraction. You see, getting rid of the Tibetans understand it. They call it obscuration. All these layers and overlays of all these thoughts you've been taught, and it's what Jesus said was, why are you putting your light under a bushel basket? Why are you obscuring? You know, Merton saw everybody shining like the sun, that last kind of level, and then he saw what we all are. You see, so it's hard to get anybody in a consumer culture where more is better to buy into the idea that letting go of something, to just gently laying it aside, could do anything. But it's actually powerful. The Buddhists have always known this. Jesus knew it too. Why do you hide your light under a bushel basket? Let's take enough with the bushel baskets. Jesus died, and he died on the cross, supposedly, and this is the Gospel of Mark, and so Mark was amazing. And so Jesus breathed his last, okay? And then the very next sentence is, the veil in the temple was rent. We watch TV and we see that kind of cutting all the time. But back then, when they told stories, there was none of that. There was no movies. That's like a movie cut. And so there you are. Who could imagine people reading that in the old days, listening to that story? But that asks you to, Jesus died, and then the veil in the temple was rent. In other words, the Holy of Holies could be seen, you see. And it's a challenging thought. He lost everything. He emptied himself out. He was totally empty. And then the thing that was separating him from the ultimate, the Holy of Holies in the temple, that veil was rent. That's really serious imagery. It's saying there's something about emptying yourself out totally that will open things up, you see. So that's one thing, less is more. And we've talked about trains and hopping on and hopping off of trains, you know. The other thing was big energy came in, and it wasn't in the plan, but it just came out in the talk. These things that there's thoughts, and then there's this feeling of big energy, anger, love, joy, sorrow. There's thoughts, but then there's these kind of thoughts that are so powerful, these occurrences, the war in Ukraine, there's the things arise that are so powerful, they have so much energy to them. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? You'll encounter it in sitting, you encounter it in daily life. We do two things usually. Emotion really, the word emovere comes from Italian, which means it moves. But when it hits you like big energy, you one day you're married, and then next day your spouse dies. You know, that's huge. How do you deal with that? Okay. What Merton said there is exactly how you deal with it. I'm going to put it back up. You know, we're all sort of homo amnesians here. I certainly am. Well, maybe I lost it. It's not there, so it's not meant to be put up, I guess. I can't find it. But it said, technology is really playing around with me. I got to get out of there. Have I lost this? Let's stop this share. Yeah. He said, big problems come up, big energy. what the midterms is coming up. Talk about big energy. Some of us are feeling it already. What do you do with big energy? Well, you can repress it, which is my form, or you can say you take it, you act it out. But the middle ground for the Buddhists would say, the narrow road, the hard road, as Jesus would say, is you bear it. You don't try to do anything with it. You hold it. And if you hold it, then it'll be transformed. Now that's what to do with big energy, but to be able to see that you're always dealing with big energy. There's depression, big energy, anxiety, big energy, fear, big energy. But that's also another great word for the divine, big energy. God doesn't do it for some people. It's been so misused and thrown around and whatever, those three words. But to think of the divine and the whole cosmos as big energy, and it's coming through you all the time, and can you hold it and transform it? And that's what fueled Merton writing 60 books. It's what had Martin Luther King do what he did. It's what has somehow how all the mystics did it, is they knew they could hold the big energy. And just the doing of it creates more inner space. You become a bigger container. But so that became a topic yesterday. And Parker Palmer, he knows about this, and he said, when you don't know violence is what happens when you don't know what to do with the pain, and physical pain, big energy. The pain of seeing injustice, big energy. And if you don't know what to do with it, if you don't have a method of, transforming it, you will transmit it. Now, if you act out, then somebody else takes it. And then we hurt people, in our own family. The nearest, always hurt the ones you love because you're living with them. So you transmit it. You don't know what to do with the anger. You give it to your husband or wife, your kids. If you repress it, you're hurting yourself. And then it'll come out sideways. And so when Merton says you're not there to solve your problems, you're there to bear them. I like this line in William Blake. I've used it a million times in different poems. You bear the beams of love. And he's using that idea of Jesus bore the beam on the cross. You bear the beams of love, the big energy. You say, yeah. And that will actually not only keep you from transmitting it or repressing it, it'll transform you, essentially. Next week, Holy Week, is big energy. It's such a big energy that it still changes people 2,000 years after. There's a lot of great wisdom teachers in all the traditions, but we're still feeling the big energy of these two, Buddha and Jesus. And next week is, Jesus was a 4 on the Enneagram. He was a drama king, and so we got this drama coming up, and it's big energy. And you can, when something big happens, like I had a fearful dream. I woke up from it yesterday. And I was shook up, big energy. Dreams will do that to you. I was shook up. And one of my ways of repressing it is, so I found myself opening the fridge, because when I eat, like yesterday, when I came off of the 4.5 hours, there was a terrific amount of big energy in that thing. And I was soaring. My tendency is to go eat something too. Because the ego doesn't know the difference between joy and anger. It's all big energy. The ego wants to tamp it down. And one of the ways we tamp it down is through substances, whether it's food or whatever. That's a way to sort of cut it down a little bit. For me, I could eat and I would start to flatten it out a little bit. But why would you want to do that? Because this is the energy of life. And, the Big Bang, we talk about it. It wasn't just one moment of big energy. It's still banging. And it's a good example of that, because constantly real life is coming at you in packets of big energy, all kinds of sides. But when something big happens, if you have a contemplative practice, this is what the Zen guys call hard sitting. Until you know how to sit with really big energy and transform it rather than transmitting it either to somebody else in the outside environment or squelching it down, just pushing it down, which is my form normally, in which case you're hurting yourself and it will come out sideways. I mean, my life has proven that, and maybe wreck your marriage kind of thing. Sad. Okay. One of my great pilgrim friends, Kelly McIntyre, her grandmother just died at 96 and a half or 99 and a half years. And she just sent me a picture. I'm putting it up on my prayer board there. I'll be walking with both of them for 49 days, the way Tibetans do. But there's a terrific sadness that comes when you lose somebody. And that's big energy and big life. And we tend to think of, well, I don't want that energy. I'd rather have joy or something like that. Well, the ego will fight it all. That big energy of joy, I didn't even know what it was. I was 32 before I allowed myself to feel it. And I didn't even know what it was. It's very interesting because the ego doesn't care. It's threatened by anything that's bigger than it is. And so it'll find a way. See, and so this is training. First of all, you're dropping any thoughts that are sapping your energy, and that those it's usually the garden variety of 6 or 7 thoughts that keep recycling for 70 years for me. So you get off those express trains, and you're really just opening yourself up to the big energy. You're opening yourself up to the universe, to the cosmos. Towards the end of his life, Thomas Keating, when he didn't like to use the word God towards the end, even though he said it's just isness expanding to infinity. Big energy, big energy. Yeah, don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of it. So that would be sort of the takeaway, the springing off from yesterday. I really recommend to go and listen to the teaching, because we really got nitty gritty. I've skipped the talking about neural pathways and psychology and the Enneagram. There's a lot of that involved. But the real takeaway, I think, for me was less is more. Just every time you drop a thought, lay it aside. You don't have to push it. You don't have to, do anything. It's very gentle. You just lay it aside, come back to the openness. And if you're dealing with something that is really big right now, don't try to solve it. Hold it in the heart. You just put it in your heart. It might be totally unresolved. That's what you hold. That's the big energy of something that's totally unresolved in your life right now. You can just sit with it, not to get rid of it, not to solve it, but to transform it. It will happen. That is the tradition. And so any of that can happen. So I think that's about enough of the words. We'll turn to the silence and do the practice.